Hello, I'm Nick Park from Evangelical Alliance Ireland, and this is our weekly message. It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. Today we want to cover a subject which, to be honest, is a little bit of an added little bit to a series we did before on the XXXY files, which was where we looked at sexuality and gender and how we can respond in a Christ-like way to current cultural shifts that are taking place. And what I wanted to address today is the issue of masculinity, biblical masculinity, and we will be looking at femininity as well in a couple of weeks' time. But biblical masculinity, because a couple of years ago there was a men's conference in Missouri in the United States where they had these monster trucks that were crushing cars and everything, and fireworks going off and such like. And there was quite a controversy over it, with people accusing it of displaying toxic masculinity. And immediately there were those that responded, because everything in the States tends to be very polarized today. There's a left-wing, a right-wing reaction to everything. And so after people accused this conference of displaying toxic masculinity, I saw a lot of Christians saying things like, well, there's nothing toxic about masculinity. And that's quite true. There is nothing toxic about masculinity per se. That doesn't mean there isn't such a thing as toxic masculinity. If we talk about false religion, we're not saying all religion is false. We're saying that in contrast to true religion, there is false religion. And in the same way, in contrast to masculinity, which is biblical and good, there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. So, but neither do I think that what was taking place at that men's conference was toxic masculinity. I would rather call it puerile masculinity. The idea that masculinity is expressed in monster trucks driving over cars and such like, and people beating their chests saying, "Whoa, look at us, we are men." That's like a 7-year-old's concept of what masculinity is. It's not true masculinity. It's certainly not biblical masculinity, but neither is it toxic masculinity. That, you know, if you think watching monster trucks drive over cars and fire in the middle of a load of fireworks makes you a man, that's not toxic. It's not going to cause a lot of damage to society. It's just stupid, to be honest. So it wasn't toxic masculinity. Neither was it real masculinity. It was puerile, childish masculinity, like a little boy imagines masculinity to be. Now, there is indeed such a thing as toxic masculinity. It's expressed, for example, in the online social influencer Andrew Tate. And this is a version of masculinity that's based on greed, on lust, on disrespecting women, on manipulating women, even abuse and violence against women, coercion, control. This kind of toxic masculinity is appealing to a number of young men. Some of those young men because they are in fact afraid of women and feel intimidated by women, particularly strong women. And so we live in a society where there is toxic masculinity. And the fact that Andrew Tate and his ilk managed to attract a large online following and a lot of money flowing through their coffers as a result, with accusations that they've got involved in people trafficking and pornography and other things like that. The fact that this takes place shows that there is a market for toxic masculinity. The violence that is often expressed against women, femicide, murder of women, is a real problem in society. Abuse of women, violence against women. We had a case recently here in Ireland where there was an off-duty soldier attacked a woman in the street and beat her senseless. And when he went to court, he was only given a suspended sentence for it. Now, the young lady involved had the courage to speak up and say this is not right, and pretty well a lot of people agreed with her, and the state prosecutors actually appealed the sentence, and he was now sent to prison, which I think is the right thing to do, because you know what, if he had beaten a judge senseless, I don't think any court would have given him a suspended sentence. They'd have sent him to jail straight away. And why should he receive a lesser sentence for attacking and beating up a woman on the street? So there is this toxic masculinity, and there is a movement of incels, I-N-C-E-L-S, involuntary celibate, which is actually men, predominantly young men, who can't find themselves a woman, and so they turn to violence and disrespect towards women and abuse of women, and trolling them and insulting them and threatening, even death threats online and stuff like this. So this toxic masculinity is a real problem. Now, to say, oh well, masculinity is not toxic, is to ignore the fact that some masculinity, some false concepts of masculinity are indeed toxic, and we need to be aware of that. I've also heard people say, well, the reason why people are attracted to Andrew Tate and this toxic masculinity is because the church it's not masculine enough, it's too feminine. And that's nonsense, because do you know what? No matter what the church has been doing, there's always been men who will use violence against women. There's always been men who are afraid of women, who are intimidated by women and resort to violence and hate and abuse, who want to control women, who want to resort to even rape and murder. These problems have always been there in our societies, irrespective of what's happening in the church, and we need to be aware of that. It's certainly right that the church needs to promote a positive biblical model of masculinity. I do believe that men should be men and women should be women. You know, the Bible speaks about men should not wear women's clothing, women should not wear men's clothing. That's not about whether somebody wears a pair of trousers or not. So I know there are some people who try to argue that. They say, well, a woman should never wear trousers or pants, as the Americans call them, because they say that's wearing men's clothes. And you know what? If I see a woman wearing a powder pink trouser suit, I don't think that's men's clothes at all. I think a man would look very strange wearing a powder pink trouser suit. So that's not saying women shouldn't wear trousers or jeans or anything else. But the fact is that men and women are different. Men should be men and women should be women. But we're talking about men being men in biblical masculinity, not in the false narratives of masculinity that we find pushed in our societies. So what does biblical masculinity look like? Quite simply, it looks like Jesus. You know, when I look at Jesus, I see the model of what a true man should be like. And that's what I want to be like. And my goal as a man, I want to be a man like Jesus. So that doesn't really involve running over cars in monster trucks. It doesn't mean I have to go out hunting and shoot animals for the fun of it. It doesn't mean I have to beat my chest and say, look how masculine I am, because Jesus didn't do any of those things. In fact, I love that passage in John chapter 13, where it says Jesus washed the disciples' feet. He said, knowing that he had come from God and knowing that he was returning to the Father, he put a towel around himself and washed the disciples' feet. Jesus knew where he was coming from, knew where he was going to. He had the security to wash his disciples' feet and not be afraid of what people would think of him. And in the same way, a real man will follow Jesus and be secure in his masculinity in following Jesus, rather than beating his chest and saying, look at me, I'm a real man. So what does the masculinity we see in Jesus look like? We see kindness. That's masculinity. We see humility. We see patience. We see self-control. We see vulnerability as well. We also see Jesus including women in his ministry. You see, sometimes in toxic masculinity, they're saying, well, we've got to protect women. Well, we're not just to protect women, we're also to respect women. And Jesus respected women in the way he included them in his ministry. So if I want to be a real man as a Christian, then I follow Jesus as my pattern of masculinity. Yes, there is such a thing as toxic masculinity. No, all masculinity is not toxic. There's a good masculinity, and we find it in Jesus Christ, and that is what men of God should pursue. As I said, we will, in a couple of weeks' time, look at femininity and see what the Bible has to say about that as well. But until then, God bless you. It might be Friday, but Sunday's coming.